Why do some Koreans have negative feelings toward Japan? This question cannot be explained by a single event. It is connected to modern history, to school education in South Korea, and to unique cultural concepts such as Sojungwa ideology and the emotional idea of Han. In recent years, however, the situation has started to change. A growing number of young Koreans are re-examining traditional historical narratives through the internet and global information sources. Today, we will explore the overall picture of this complex issue. First, the foundation of anti-Japanese sentiment in South Korea is history. Education. In South Korean textbooks, the period of Japanese rule is described as colonial occupation. The narrative places strong emphasis on land confiscation, suppression of the Korean language, and forced labor under Japanese authority. In the national curriculum, this modern period takes up around 20% of the entire history program. As a result, the impression that Japan was the aggressor and Korea was the victim becomes deeply rooted in the minds of many students. South Korean textbooks describe the period of Japanese rule as follows. While modern facilities were developed mainly in cities, and transportation and communication networks improved, these advancements primarily served the Japanese population. Cities saw the emergence of department stores, movie theaters, restaurants, and even Western-style houses. Coffee, caramel, and other modern luxury goods also became popular. However, most of these developments benefited Japanese residents, and their main purpose was to demonstrate Japanese superiority. Many Koreans, especially the poor, were forced to live in simple homes on the outskirts or along rivers, enduring harsh living conditions. Moreover, the Japanese authorities imposed strict regulations on daily life, controlling many aspects of Korean society. In reality, compared to the period before Japanese rule, various social infrastructures were significantly developed. For example, the number of schools increased dramatically, and the literacy rate rose from 4% to 61%. Hospitals became more numerous, and improvements in hygiene, along with mass vaccination programs, helped raise the average life expectancy from 24 to 56 years. Additionally, Korea had long suffered from environmental degradation due to deforestation and slash-and-burn agriculture, which left many symbolic bald hills. Under Japanese rule, forestry projects and the clarification of land ownership contributed to better flood control and the re-greening of landscapes, restoring ecological stability. These positive aspects of Japanese rule are rarely mentioned in South Korean education. Students are generally taught to see this period as one of Japanese oppression. In films, dramas, and news reports, the Japanese military and police are often repeatedly portrayed as oppressors. As a result, even generations who did not personally experience Japanese rule inherit strong anti-Japanese sentiments. In fact, those who did receive education during the colonial period are more likely to remember and appreciate the Japanese teachers who taught them at that time. Another important but often overlooked factor in understanding Korean attitudes toward Japan is the traditional worldview called Sojungwa ideology. Another important but often overlooked factor in understanding Korean attitudes toward Japan is the traditional worldview called Sojungwa ideology. During the Joseon dynasty, Korea viewed itself as the inheritor of Chinese civilization, which was considered the center of culture. Koreans saw themselves as carriers of this civilized heritage. In contrast, Japan was often regarded as culturally inferior. Historically, this created the perception that Korea was culturally superior, while Japan was subordinate. However, in the modern era, Japan modernized first and eventually came to rule the Korean peninsula. Some historians argue that this reversal created a deep sense of humiliation, as Korea's traditional self-image clashed with the harsh realities of Japanese rule. Another essential concept for understanding Korean culture is Han, a unique emotional idea. Han is a complex mix of resentment, sorrow, and regret, and it is believed to be passed down not only at the individual level, but also as a collective or national sentiment. Historical invasions, foreign rule, oppression by authorities, and social injustices create sufferings that are never fully resolved, which accumulate within the community. As a result, emotional memories of past events are preserved over long periods of time. Even today in South Korea, the tragic ends of past presidents are seen as symbolic of this culture of Han. It may be more accurate to describe it as holding on to rather than simply resenting. This cultural psychology also affects memories of Japan, meaning that even as times change, these emotional ties are difficult to fully sever. There are also issues such as the comfort women, forced laborers, and the Dokdo, Takeshima, territorial dispute that have fueled anti-Japanese sentiment within South Korea. In particular, Korean governments have occasionally used anti-Japanese sentiment politically, especially when presidential approval ratings declined. These historical and territorial issues have sometimes been leveraged to rally public support and strengthen national unity. In 1982, the Asahi Shimbun reported a story claiming that journalist Seiji Yoshida had rounded up comfort women on Jeju Island. This fabricated testimony became one of the main sources supporting the narrative of forced recruitment, drawing international attention to the comfort women issue. The falsehood of Yoshida's claims was later revealed, and Asahi Shimbun officially apologized. However, the issue itself was politicized and has not been fully resolved, eventually becoming an international concern. After Yoshida's fabricated statements, in 1991, Kim Hakson came forward as a former comfort woman, followed by many others, bringing the issue further into the public eye. Although their personal testimonies claimed they were forcibly taken by Japanese authorities, regardless of the factual accuracy, the matter became highly politicized, shaping public perception and international debate. Next, there is the issue of forced labor during the war. Japan faced a labor shortage, and many people from the Korean peninsula were mobilized to work in Japan. This mobilization occurred in stages. The majority of Koreans were employed through recruitment or placement programs rather than by force. Mandatory conscription only began 1 year before the end of the war, in September 1944, when the conscription ordinance was enacted. Moreover, these workers were paid for their labor, so at the time, this was not considered a major issue. The Takeshima Dokdo dispute emerged after World War II. In 1952, South Korea declared the Syngman Line, which imposed restrictions on Japanese fishing activities and included Takeshima within its boundaries. Until the Japan-Korea Fisheries Agreement was signed in 1965, Japanese fishing vessels were sometimes seized, and crew members detained by South Korean authorities. Under international law, including the San Francisco Peace Treaty, Takeshima is clearly recognized as Japanese territory. However, South Korea continues to exercise effective control over the islands. In this way, there are various issues between Japan and South Korea, and it is true that public sentiment in South Korea remains complex. However, in recent years, thanks to the widespread use of the internet through YouTube, digital archives, international research papers, diplomatic documents, and newspaper databases, the younger generation in South Korea has begun to access sources of history beyond government narratives and school textbooks. As a result, a growing number of people no longer hold absolute anti-Japanese views. In other words, anti-Japanese sentiment exists strongly in some segments of society as a result of politics, education, and historical interpretation. But it is also important to recognize that not all South Koreans dislike Japan or the Japanese people. Recent surveys and media reports show a clear trend. People in their 20s and 30s in South Korea tend to have a more favorable view of Japan compared with older generations. Among teenagers, more than half reportedly hold a positive impression of Japan, despite the fact that the education system has not significantly changed. This shift suggests that South Korea has entered an era in which younger generations, much like in Japan where trust in traditional media has declined, are actively accessing information on their own and sharing knowledge shaped by new values and diverse perspectives, rather than relying solely on conventional narratives. Their positive feelings toward Japan are often based on an approach that separates culture and people from history and politics. Because of this, their views cannot be defined simply as anti-Japanese or pro-Japanese. Still, the fact that we can observe signs of change is, in many ways, a positive development for the future. At the very least, the Korean Peninsula has historically served as a crucial defensive line for Japan, and it goes without saying that a relationship in which Japan and South Korea can cooperate is highly desirable. In this video, we explored the roots of anti-Japanese sentiment in South Korea. If you found this content valuable, please subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up. Your support helps more people discover this topic, so we would really appreciate it if you could share this video as widely as possible. We look forward to hearing your thoughts, so please leave your comments below and join the conversation.